The sun had just begun to rise over the quiet streets of Hillstone, Colorado. Pale light painted the tops of houses gold, and the morning dew glistened on freshly cut lawns. It was the kind of neighborhood where the only sound was the soft rumble of sprinklers and the occasional bark of a dog. Peaceful, predictable, dead silent. At the end of Pinebrook Lane, nestled between two two-story homes with matching mailboxes, stood a small, single-level house with faded siding and a sagging porch. It looked as if it had aged 10 years more than the rest of the block, not from neglect, but from the quiet weight of time. That house belonged to Jack Turner. Nobody really noticed Jack. He was the kind of man who blended into the background, just another gray-haired loner with a worn-out denim jacket and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in a few days. Every morning at 6 a.m., like he walked down his driveway to retrieve the paper. Every evening, he sat on the front porch with a cup of black coffee, staring into the horizon like he was waiting for something that never came. The neighbors didn't know much about him, only that he had moved in 4 years ago, didn't talk much, and paid his property taxes on time. No wife, no kids, no visitors. Some said he was military, maybe Army, maybe Marines. Nobody was sure. When Mrs. Devlin from across the street asked him once if he had ever served, he simply replied, "Yeah, a while ago." And that was the end of that. He never shared what he had seen, never talked about who he lost. Jack Turner had served 28 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and a lifetime of covert operations no one would ever speak about. He had worn every uniform, every patch, every scar, but when he came home, there was no welcome parade, no ceremony, just silence. And honestly, he preferred it that way. He didn't need medals or attention. What he needed was distance, from people, from questions, from the past. He had chosen Hillstone for one reason. It was quiet, not just in noise, but in energy. Nobody here was interested in his story. Nobody knocked on his door. But silence has a way of amplifying what's buried underneath. It began, like most things, with a small irritation. On a Friday night in early October, just as Jack was turning off the porch light, he heard the buzz of an engine. High-pitched, sharp, a motorcycle, then another, then another. The sound echoed through the streets like angry wasps. He stepped out and saw them, 4 kids, maybe 17 or 18, racing down the street with no helmets and louder pipes than common sense. One of them popped a wheelie right in front of Jack's lawn, the engine screaming. They didn't stop, didn't wave, didn't care. Jack said nothing, but he didn't take his eyes off them until they disappeared into the dark. The next morning, he found deep tire marks on the edge of his lawn, grass torn up, dirt kicked onto the sidewalk. Not much. Nothing worth calling the city about. He got his shovel, flattened the patch, and moved on. 2 nights later, they returned, this time with music blaring from portable speakers strapped to the back of one of the bikes. Bass so deep it shook Jack's windows. They circled the street like a racetrack, spinning around the cul-de-sac at the end before speeding back toward the main road. Jack watched from the shadows of his porch, mug in hand. His neighbors, especially the younger families, grumbled about the noise. Some sent emails to the HOA. Others whispered complaints to each other during dog walks. But nobody confronted them. Jack just stared, and then one night they stopped, right in front of his house. There were 4 of them, all in black hoodies and baseball caps turned backward. The leader, a tall, sharp-jawed kid with greasy blonde hair, revved his engine as Jack stepped out to grab his newspaper. They didn't speak, just stared at him as the engines growled beneath them. Jack paused mid-step, holding the paper like a soldier holding a radio waiting for an order. His eyes met the leader's. Just for a second. Then they sped off again. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat by the window until dawn, fingers gently drumming the table beside his mug, eyes fixed on the empty street. In his garage sat a box labeled Turner Classified. It hadn't been opened in years. It held photographs, field notes, a disassembled pistol, and a dusty purple heart in a case he had never mounted on a wall. It also held something else, a version of himself he had tried to bury. But sometimes the dead don't stay buried. The air was thick that night, still heavy and charged with something unspoken. The kind of night that didn't need thunder to announce a storm. Jack sat in the dark of his living room, blinds drawn, lights off, listening to the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. His mug of coffee sat cold on the table beside him. His eyes were locked on the street, though the window gave him nothing but shadows and the orange glow of a distant street lamp. It had been 3 days since the boys stopped their engines in front of his house. 3 days since they stared him down. Since he saw in their leader's eyes the look of someone testing boundaries, not just to provoke, but to conquer. Jack had seen that look before, not in a suburban teenager, but in the eyes of warlords, insurgents, and men who had nothing to lose. He hadn't opened the box in the garage yet, but tonight it felt like it was opening inside of him. At 11:14 p.m., the silence cracked. The sound came low at first, a distant revving growl like a mechanical animal waking from slumber. Then came the music, the heavy bass rattling windows. Jack stood slowly and walked to the window, pulling the blind with 2 fingers just enough to see. There they were again. 4 of them, maybe 5 now, circling the cul-de-sac like sharks. One peeled off and stopped at the curb in front of his yard, then another. Soon they were parked in a V-shape facing his house, headlamps burning into his porch. He didn't move. The leader stepped off his bike. Same kid, tall, cocky, wearing a black hoodie and a smug smile that Jack could see even from inside. He lit a cigarette like it was a ritual and began walking toward the porch. Jack stepped back from the window. He didn't go for his phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he turned toward the hallway, walked through the house and into the garage. The box was there in the far corner under an old tarp. Turner. Classified. He lifted the lid. Inside were the memories he had tried to suppress. The photographs from Kabul, the field journals from Ramadi, the list of names that had long since faded in ink, but not in memory. He moved them aside. His hand found the cold steel of the disassembled pistol. He picked it up and began assembling it with slow, deliberate motions. Like muscle memory. Like prayer. Click, slide, snap, lock. When it was done, he placed it on the workbench. And he did not pick it up. Instead, Jack grabbed something else, his dog tags. Not worn in years, not even on Veterans Day. He placed them around his neck, tucked under his shirt. Then he walked back inside, through the hallway, through the silence. When he opened the front door, the leader was already halfway up the steps. "Evening, old man," the kid said with a grin. "Nice night, huh?" Jack said nothing. He stepped forward slowly like he was stepping onto foreign soil. The kid laughed. "You deaf or just stupid?" Jack's voice came low, steady. "You're not here to talk, so let's not pretend." The kid raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you got jokes now?" "No," Jack said. "I have limits." The boy took a drag from his cigarette and flicked it onto Jack's porch. "We're just hanging out. Freedom, right? Ain't that what you old dogs fought for?" Behind him, the others chuckled. Jack's eyes didn't leave his. "You're not here for freedom. You're here for a reaction." Silence stretched between them, and then the leader did exactly what Jack had expected. He reached forward and knocked over the small potted plant by Jack's door. One Jack had kept for years, the last thing his late wife had planted before her cancer took her. It shattered on the concrete. Something cracked in Jack, not loudly, not like a bone snapping, more like the quiet tear of cloth under strain. "Oops," the boy smirked. "Guess that was important." Jack took a breath, long, deep, controlled. Then he stepped off the porch, down the steps, onto the street. His movements were slow, steady, but unmistakably deliberate. The boys on the bikes went quiet. The leader chuckled once more. "What, you gonna fight me, Grandpa?" Jack didn't speak. Instead, he walked past the boy, right past him. He went to the first motorcycle parked at the curb and calmly knocked it over. It fell with a crash of metal and sparks. Before the kid could react, Jack moved to the second, then the third, each crashing to the ground with a violence that seemed almost surgical. Within 15 seconds, 3 motorcycles were in a heap. "What the f—" The leader spun toward him, fists clenched, but Jack stood still, calm, not even breathing heavy. "Pick them up," he said. The boy stared. "What did you just say?" "I said pick them up and leave." The kid moved like he was going to swing. Jack didn't flinch, just waited. In that stillness, something shifted. The boy's friends didn't move. They didn't laugh. They watched, unsure, uneasy. The leader took a step back, his bravado cracking. Jack stepped forward. "I'm not going to touch you," he said. "Not unless you make me." His voice was ice. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The boy hesitated, then spat on the ground. "Whatever, man," he muttered. "You're fucking crazy." He turned and walked to the heap of bikes. Jack watched him, didn't follow, didn't gloat. He just stood in the middle of the street, still and strong as a statue.